So now it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Lucy He. Most of you know her already. Dr. Lucy He is an Alaska Stroke Coalition physician sponsor. She's a neurosurgeon with Anchorage Neurosurgical Associates. And her goal is basically to improve patient outcomes by focusing on stroke care systems and the associated infrastructure. More importantly, I think Dr. He is known as just a powerhouse. I have met a lot of physicians around the world. Dr. He stands out as being absolutely determined, relentless, and a driving force, not only in her hospital, but throughout the state. So please welcome Dr. Lucy He.
So thank you very much for that very lovely introduction, Carolina. I think that instead of powerhouse, what you're looking for is just lots of words per minute. I've been told many times that people have never met someone else who speaks quite as quickly as I do, with as many words per minute and as many flight of ideas and sentences covered, during that time span. So thank you guys all very much for coming to this meeting. This is, a great opportunity for us as the Alaska Stroke Coalition, along with Rapid, to partner and bring everybody together in the state to really meet in person, and not just at 6 o'clock in the morning every 2 months for our bi-monthly stroke meeting. So thank you for that. I do talk really fast, and so I'm trying to slow myself down as much as possible. If it is still too fast, please just raise your hand or yell at me and I'll try to slow down, okay? And so I really wanted to talk a little bit about how we came about to getting this project done with what's called the Rapid Alaska Project, and getting RapidAI implemented across more hospitals in the state. I have no financial or conflicts of interest disclosures. I am a proctor for the Microvention web device, which has nothing to do with this talk. So the Alaska Stroke Coalition, as has already been described, was officially founded back in last year in 2023. We're a fully 503c nonprofit organization. And the goal of this has actually been longstanding. For a number of years since I got up here in 2018, we've been trying to get all of the different hospitals together, large and small, across the state, to work together to help improve stroke care. And for a number of reasons, those efforts were unsuccessful. Part of it was COVID, and so that really sort of shut things down. And part of it also, though, was that I think our prior efforts were mainly driven by one hospital or another sort of hosting the event, and it, I think, makes it a little bit awkward then when you start talking about, hey, these are the changes that we need to make. I think that people felt like they didn't have an equal voice in what was happening, or that their concerns weren't equally heard, and so. We very fortuitously, I talked to Rapid for a long time about, what do other states do in terms of those that have a stroke coalition? How do you get that set up? And I was introduced to members of the Mississippi Stroke Coalition, along with the Hawaii Stroke Coalition. And in talking with those folks, it was very clear that having a statewide agnostic, if you will, stroke coalition is very important. It brings together everybody on equal footing and allows for us to really discuss, at our leisure and without any filters, what is going on, what needs to be improved, and how can we do that? And I would ask, these stroke coalition leaders, like, how do you guys get that set up? And they said, well, you just go through the paperwork. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And so we never really got anywhere. Fortuitously, though, Kevin Myrick, who now is the stroke coordinator, he actually has a different title now at Alaska Regional Hospital, had previously come from a hospital in Kauai, in Hawaii, that was a part of the stroke coalition. So I grilled Kevin for probably 40 minutes after his official interview about what it meant to start a statewide stroke coalition, and all the things that, I had these ideas about how we could do in Alaska. We just didn't know how to do it. And so Kevin got up here, and I think in less than 2 weeks, he called me and said, oh, by the way, we have a statewide stroke coalition now. And I said, what does that mean? He's like, I filed the paperwork, we're it. And so that's basically how the Alaska Stroke Coalition started. But to be fair, the executive board, particularly Kevin, Kelly, and Amber, they do this as a labor of passion, love, and also to the benefit of the community. Everybody is working full-time jobs and then doing all of this stuff on top of it. And so really it is a testament to their effort and labor that we are where we are today. Myself and Dr. Rob Latta, who's a vascular neurologist with Peak Neurology, sort of round out the executive team, as they say. So this has been covered already. Every 40 seconds, a stroke occurs in the US. The key thing to remember here is that every minute that a clot sits in a blood vessel, 2 million brain cells die. The good news is that we have, trillions of brain cells, but still 2 million in a minute is a lot, okay? It's the 5th cause of mortality in the United States. And the, Lancet Public Health Journal talked about the fact that, at the current rates of stroke, if we continue as we will be, there's going to be a over $1 trillion economic hit by 2030, okay? $1 trillion, that's huge. The thing about stroke is that it doesn't just affect the patient, at the time of their initial insult and their hospital stay, but it has lasting impact and results if the patient is left with long-term deficits. Patients who are young, especially, who can't go back to work, or older patients who then can't be independent and care for themselves. This is a dramatic and significant change to their quality of life and to what they can do and whatnot. And so at the same time, there's been a lot of things that are focused on what do we do to prevent, stroke and whatnot. As much as it matters also, what can we do for patients that are actively having a stroke, identifying them, and then also treating the patients that are having the really large strokes or the large vessel occlusions as quickly as possible. Time is brain, not surprisingly. In Alaska, we have a very unique sort of challenge and issue, which is that we are geographically the largest landmass by state. We are over 2.5 times the size of Texas, despite what Texas tells itself all the time. And to put this in context, Yukavik in the far north to Anchorage, that is 1,200 nautical miles. That is the same distance from Dallas, Texas to New York City. Okay, so it's pretty significant, all right? At the same time, we have an interesting situation where even though we have a population of about 730,000 people, we have 23 different hospitals that are identified by the Department of Health. These do not include smaller community centers and hospitals closer to the villages and things like that. And within these 23 hospitals, we have 13 critical access hospitals, 2 military hospitals, and 2 inpatient rehab facilities. For this entire state, we have 1 long-term care facility. This matters because it means that our resources to take care of patients that are significantly debilitated by stroke is very, very limited. More importantly, over half of our population does not live in this Anchorage general area. And so if you, are a part of that 50% and you have a major stroke, your care then gets changed. It has to be in Anchorage. There's no place else to take care of you, essentially. Of the hospitals with official stroke designations, we have 1 primary stroke center at Matsu, 1 primary plus stroke center, Providence, and 1 DMV comprehensive stroke center, Alaska Regional Hospital. Okay. The 2 stroke thrombectomy capable centers are, here in Anchorage. So what is it about Alaska? We talked about the geography. There's a significant population spread. People live all throughout the state and they like it. They, the number of patients that we talk to about wound checks after spine surgery that are in a dry cabin, never thought I had to have that conversation, but that's the Alaska way. People like being out here for a reason. But along with that, we have to factor in additional things when it comes to acute illnesses or acute care, especially for time-sensitive emergencies like trauma, STEMI, and stroke. One of them is transportation time. It's not as though at each of these major hospitals is just a fixed-wing Learjet waiting to take a patient, down to where they need to go. There are, we have limited bases or hubs for where, our medevac services locate from. They are also servicing the entire state as well. And so at any given time, there may not be a flight crew available, or more significantly in Alaska, weather may delay or prevent, an anticipated transfer for a patient. We also have some resource issues. It is very rare, if not unheard of anywhere else in the United States, for your cath lab team that helps support us in our stroke interventions to also have to support the cardiologists for their cardiac interventions, the interventional radiologists for their acute interventions, and also vascular surgery for things like ruptured AAAs and whatnot. At essentially every other hospital in the lower 48, even if they're small, if they're offering these different service lines, they have specialized teams that take call for this. And what that means also, though, is that we have a resource utilization issue. So if one of the cardiologists is doing a STEMI intervention, that means that cath lab and that staff in that room are not available then to take on and do a stroke at the same time. And so because of that, it's important that we understand and triage these situations, but also then make sure that we work to essentially standardize the equipment and the care and the way that we do things across the board, so that we can ensure that no matter where this patient winds up getting their intervention, they're going to get the same care, and hopefully by that we can feel good that they're going to have the same outcome. And with that, over the course of the last 10 years, the providers at Providence, the interventional radiologists, have been doing the bulk of the stroke intervention care. As of August 1st, my partner, Jennifer Sokolowski, who's in the corner, and myself have taken over that formally at both Providence and Alaska Regional. We also have 2 additional locums providers Blaise Baxter and Tony Bell that kind of round that out to cover locums for us and whatnot. And so one of the things that we're hoping for that I know has been a complaint and a concern over the years is to essentially standardize, what we are doing, the cases that we're taking, the equipment that we're using, and then also allow for increased ease of if one of the hospitals becomes encumbered, we can easily transfer the patient to the other hospital to do the case, and there's not going to be an issue of, well, who's accepting what's going to happen and whatnot. And so this is to the benefit of our community. So that's that. So the CDC has talked about the significant need basically to build what they call a system of stroke care, or SSOC. And what they talk about in this is that having a stroke pre-notification, EMS triage for transport, meaning that the patients need to go to the appropriate facility depending on the timeline of where their last known normal symptoms are, having interfacility transfer agreements between smaller hospitals that are hubs and larger, thrombectomy or comprehensive stroke centers that are the other way around, I guess, the spokes. And then along with that, at a very high level, we need to have a state level registry of stroke data. If we don't know what the actual burden of our problem is, how many patients there are, what their diagnosis breakdown is, how many stroke interventions are we doing, how many large vessel occlusions there are, there's really no way for us to then say, hey, what we're doing is working or not working, right? And these have been deficits that have existed, within the Alaska and stroke care for a long time. And so when the Alaska Stroke Coalition thinks about stroke care, we sort of divide it into three pillars. And the easiest way of talking about this is that the stuff that happens before the stroke, that stuff that's happening during your stroke, and the stuff that happens after the stroke. The before the stroke and the after the stroke care aspect, admittedly, we have not been able to delve into as much. However, it isn't to say that, we're not heading in that direction. The bulk of what happens and what we've done in the first year is really related to the acute stroke care, for the patient. So Dr. Albers gave a riveting and really fantastic overview of what RapidAI is, what CT perfusion technology is. And it's kind of interesting to me. So I was a first-year resident in 2011 when a big stroke trial called IMS-3 came out. The International Stroke Conference was held in Hawaii that year, and it was one of the most demoralizing and depressing conferences that anyone had been to. And the reason for that was they looked at basically large vessel occlusion and mechanical thrombectomy, and basically the results of that trial said that it didn't matter. It didn't seem to benefit patients. And that was, hugely, impactful in the wrong way. As soon as that meeting was over, insurance companies across the U.S. Basically said, we're not reimbursing for stroke intervention. But the people who were doing stroke intervention could still see the benefits. We knew that the issue was that we didn't run a trial that was powered correctly, that used and selected the correct patients, and we're using the most recent technology when it came to being able to get clots out and identify patients that were not just having a large vessel occlusion, but also had salvageable brain tissue. And so in 2015, those first 5 trials came out basically, and that was a huge change. The trials actually ended early because of the benefit that was seen. It became so clear that, that there was benefit to patients who were selected properly for stroke intervention that IRBs basically said it's no longer ethical for us to randomize patients. And so that was the beginning of the significant change. I came up to Alaska in 2018, right after the Dawn and Diffuse trials were published. And this was huge as well, especially in Alaska, where you think about it. I had a patient earlier today that had like an 8, almost 9 hour transfer delay secondary to weather, right? And so, previously, if we were at just 6 hours, hey, we're done. This patient is no longer a candidate, no matter what the imaging looks like. Now we have up to 24 hours. And I know that there are some trials looking at potentially even more extended windows. And this is huge. So for me, Rapid, the technology associated with it, the ease of ability to look at it on my phone, not be tethered to a computer to take call is really important. Previously, in the state, we had Alaska Regional, Providence, Prov Kodiak, and Matsu, who had already, were already on Rapid and had bought it and provided it for their hospitals and were utilizing it. We wanted to get this to additional hospitals, strategically throughout the state so that we could essentially build an infrastructure for stroke imaging care and decision-making. One of the big things that's different between taking care of a patient who might be having a STEMI versus a stroke is that with a STEMI, EMS in the field can do a 12 lead or even a 3-lead EKG, prints it out onto an 8.5 by 11 inch paper. They can take a picture of it on their phone and send it to the hospital, and they can make a decision about, whether or not we need to do an intervention or not, right? With stroke care, we have to see the full imaging. A full sequence CT angiogram of the head and neck is usually 1,200 to 1,400 pieces of paper. Okay, so that's a lot of images. Okay, it's a lot of mouse clips. On the Mac Mini, and so we have to have a better way of doing that. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but when we push images from one facility to another via the traditional PAC system, it's on average about 20 to 40 minutes before the images leave your system enter into the receiving facility system, and then get downloaded for somebody to view. One of the hardest parts about doing stroke is that the interventionalists have to be able to see the images to look at them to make a decision about, is this patient appropriate? Transferring ERs ask all the time, well, I mean, the radiologist read says that there is this thing and that there's this X, Y, and Z. Part of the problem is that the radiologist's job is to describe what they see in detail all the time. What that means clinically for us when we see it is not the same thing. And so a radiologist saying that there's a left MCA stroke already, X, Y, and Z, doesn't mean that that patient doesn't qualify stroke intervention. We have to see, like, how large is this left MCA stroke? Is it, already really established, or does it look like it's just in the early phases? And so being able to get Rapid to do that, is important. For us, this is what my phone interface looks like. These are actually screenshots from a case from a couple of, actually from the other day. And so, we see this on our phone. There's also a Rapid desktop app that people can log into. And so your sites that have it, you can grant access to anybody that wants it, your ER physicians, your hospitalists, your techs, cath lab crew, whoever wants it. It's really helpful from that standpoint. We want to be able to get, Rapid out to additional sites. And so the Rapid non-con CT head stroke LVO detection is huge, okay? So if your facility or site doesn't have 24/7 CT angiogram, that's totally fine. As Dr. Albers was talking about, up to 66% of patients with large vessel occlusion can potentially be identified using this module off of a non-contrast CT head, okay? That's big. The key with all this, though, is that you have to pair what the AI and the imaging says along with your clinical suspicion, right? If you have a patient that came in because they hit their head really hard and had a loss of conscious moment, but is walking and talking and then flags as this is probably not a patient that's having an LVO. At the same time, if you have a patient in your ER that presented and is hemiplegic on half of their body, isn't able to make speech, and the LVO detects that it looks like there's a left hyperdense MCA sign, guess what? That seems to fit. The patient has a high neurologic deficit. They have imaging now by AI that seems to match it. And the key is that we have to match and mirror the two together. AI alone or clinical suspicion alone is not always enough, but together you're trying to make the right decision for the patient. Why does all of this matter? I love this slide. Nobody knows about this slide outside of stroke intervention. Basically, this is a slide talking about the number needed to treat to benefit patients. At the very top is the cohort for percutaneous coronary intervention to see benefit from prevention of death, reinfarction, stroke, long-term mortality, things like that. These numbers are like in the 30s, 40s, and one is in the 80s. The bottom cohort is from the original 2015 large vessel occlusion trials, looking at how many people do you need to treat in order to have what's called a good outcome. Modified Rankin scale is a standardized scale that we use to judge how patients are doing after they recover from their stroke. Okay, Modified Rankin of 0 is you are ready to take on the world. You have no deficits. Modified Rankin of 1 means that you may have some chronic headaches, but you're back at work, you're driving, you're doing your normal things. Modified Rankin of 2 means that maybe you don't go back to driving, but you're playing golf, you're living at home, you're doing great. Modified Rankin of 3 is more disability, you need help with ADLs. 4 is essentially, you're requiring constant care, and 5 is, as you can guess. Most neurointerventionists probably live at a modified Rankin of like 3 or so. Never, fully there, but never fully, bad. But you look at these numbers, you're talking about, less than 10 patients that need to be treated to have a significant benefit, not just to survive, but to thrive. Okay, and this is key. Obviously, when you add in the data from the longer trials like Dawn and Diffuse, where you go out to 24 hours, the numbers needed to treat do grow. That's not surprising. Again, at 2 million brain cells per minute, the shorter the time window that you can get from the patient having the large vessel occlusion until you can get the clot out means that there is, more brain that is saved in the short term and a shorter course of recovery that happens. We see this all the time. Patients with large M1 occlusions, if they're within that 6-hour window, you pull the clot out, they're practically jumping off the table. A patient who's closer to 20 hours or 24 hours out, they have a longer recovery. Maybe at 3 or 4 days, you see them, really starting to perk up and walk around and whatnot. But the natural history of, stroke recovery we talk about is like 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. For me, the ictus of trying to get all of this, changed in Alaska really started with one patient. I remember this, gentleman, in particular. This was March of 2020, right before COVID lockdown, essentially. This was a patient who lived out in the valley and was, had really no other risk factors aside from morbid obesity. He was at home and at exactly 6:40 while eating dinner with his family, had acute onset aphasia and right-sided hemiplegia. Presented to his outside local hospital, got worked up, was a candidate for IV thrombolytics and got that. And then he basically, they started, got the IV thrombolytics, got imaging, and then identified that he had what looked like a very large clot at the ICA terminus, okay? There was about a 2-hour delay for transfer for this patient because of his body habitus. They initially wanted to helicopter him in and then realized that they wouldn't be able to. The ambulance that was initially reserved for him had gone out on another run, so they had to wait for another ambulance to come in. And then ultimately, basically, at 6:40, he had a symptom onset. Transfer was initiated essentially at 10:40, so 4 hours later, and then he arrived in Anchorage at 11:40. Okay, we knew that this patient was coming, and so we had the cath lab mobilized. We're waiting for him, and so from the time of his arrival until we got to the cath lab was only about 30 minutes, and then within about 45 minutes after that, he had complete reperfusion, as you can see. The thing that always bothered me, though, was that on his subsequent imaging, that bottom panel is what his stroke looked like. That was his infarct. Okay, for what we call a TICI 2C, meaning nearly completely normal reperfusion or blood flow. This was still his stroke infarct, which is very sizable. He avoided having to get a hemicraniectomy because of increased pressure and things like that. But it always bothered me that even though he got IV thrombolytics, he was in the 4.5-hour window for that, and that we got to him still within 6 hours, that this was the outcome. And it just always make me wonder, okay, what was it that we could have potentially done different, maybe to have shortened the timeline until we could get him to this clot out that maybe would have given him a better outcome. More importantly, he's a young patient. He's in his mid-40s. I saw him in follow-up around 5 months, and he was doing really well. He was very happy. His speech had recovered, but he still had some significant disability. He still required a lot of help from his partner in order to do normal things like feeding himself, changing clothes, going to the bathroom, bathing, and things like that. And so his modified Rankin was a 3, kind of between a 3 and a 4. And I always just felt like, man, like what was it that we could have done differently? Because you would obviously hope that this is a patient that in 6 months or maybe a year could go back to work, go back to joining the workforce and whatnot. The same kind of timeline and thing kind of kept happening over and over again, which is that, there is the patient gets there, everybody is meeting the door to CT times in 10 or 20 minutes. They recognize that there's something there. And then, as the receiving center for the large vessel occlusion for the thrombectomy, we know that the patient is coming. And so we get our cath lab staff mobilized. They're already set up and ready. When the patient arrives, all of us are waiting for the patient so that we can cut down on our door to cath lab times, our door to groin times, and our door to clot reperfusion times. And even though when you look at this, it looks good. Like we had, some minor problems, meaning the patient had dido times in and out of the door within 90 minutes, but still not terrible. Door to puncture time and door to reperfusion times look fantastic, and so let's high five ourselves, right? Then as we start to do more feedback, we send the results back and everyone says, hey, let's look at our timelines. One of the things that always stood out to me and always bothered me was this. So what is happening during this time between 10:43 until 11:40? That's an hour's worth of time. All right, it's 120 million brain cells. What exactly is happening during that time? And we see this all the time. We would get called from the outside facility to say, hey, I got a patient with an LVO. We push the images over. Can you look at it? I would look at the time on my phone and I would look at the timestamp on the CT scan. And I always ask myself, why is it always an hour or more? Like what's happening during that time? Okay. And it felt particularly unsettling because when we had strokes that came into the thrombectomy capable centers here in Anchorage, where we already had rapid software, we would get notified right away that, hey, there's a potential LVO, number one. Number two, here's the CT perfusion. It looks like it's real. And many times we call the house supervisor or the nursing supervisor, hey, get the cath lab team mobilized. We've got a stroke. We need to get going. And we would be in the cath lab already by the time the radiologist would call us and say, hey, do you know that there's an LVO here in the ER? And you're like, yeah, man, I do. Yeah, we're about to take it out. It's like, oh, sounds good. And so that differential in access and care and timeliness really bothered me. Okay. And so the question became, what can we do about it? Right now, if you really think about it, pre-rapid, everything happens in terms of stroke care in a sequence of events. A has to occur before B can occur, before C can occur. And if at every step along the way, it's taking you 15 minutes, for each person in between these steps, it doesn't seem like it's a whole lot, but all of a sudden you add this up and you've got over 2 hours before you can make a decision about either the neurointerventionalist coming or the patient going for stroke transfer. Here in Alaska, where the majority of our patients don't live here in Anchorage, there's the additional added time of the image transfer component. It takes on average 20 minutes, up to 40 minutes for images to transfer from your facility to another facility and to get downloaded into that receiving facility's PACS. No matter what we do, this is where it's at. And so add in the issue of, the patients have to transfer, and especially if the patient is transferring and on the receiving end, we haven't done things to optimize ourselves, like get the cath lab ready, get the whole team ready and waiting for the patient. That is another potential 45 minutes to an hour and a half where the patient is waiting now, here in Anchorage. So this is what the workflow looks like, for us in Anchorage previously. cuts that down time to 20 minutes. We can see the imaging on our phone. We don't have to log into a computer. We can be anywhere, doing things and then, and take care of that. And so we said, all right, so what if we did this? What if we applied Rapid to the outside hospitals, helped them optimize their workflows, got imaging that we didn't have to wait an hour for in order to see, in a PACS system, did this, cut down the transfer time significantly, and then also had the cath lab team waiting. I bet that this would significantly cut down on the time from the patient's onset of symptoms until we can get the clot out, and I bet that that would probably improve patient outcomes. And now what if we did this with multiple sites, not just with Matsu or not just with Fairbanks or South Peninsula, but with as many hospitals as we could, right? If we did that and then we asked the hospitals to allow us to see or share their rapid data with the interventionalists here in Anchorage, what would that become? What would that look like? Looks like Skynet for stroke, basically, okay? But this is the stroke system of care. We're talking about here building an integrated infrastructure for stroke imaging. At the end of the day, we can't make a decision about who needs intervention without being able to see the images. And the main issue with that is that our current system for transferring images is already maxed out. Despite what GCI says, 40 gigabytes of data per second, I get like 400 megabytes. So no matter what they say, it's not happening at that speed, okay? And so we have to find other ways, of essentially working around it. And so this was the idea, basically. And Mississippi Stroke Coalition, Hawaii Stroke Coalition said, yeah, this is what we did. It works fantastic. It's really revolutionized and changed the way that we do stroke care. I said, great. How did you guys pay for that? And they said, well, we got some funding from the state to pilot this initially. And then with that, we move forward. Rapid and myself and the Department of Health met and we pitched this idea. And they said, yeah, this is a great idea. And we said, can you help us with it? And they said, we don't have any money for it. And we said, okay, sounds good. And so, so this became the rate limiting step. And as we talked about earlier, asking the transferring facilities who have never had, contact with this technology, who don't understand how it works from our end, and also your interaction as a transferring facility with Rapid is very different than, our receiving end and as interventionalists. It's a hard sell to say, hey, however many thousands of dollars needs to go into your budget to do this. And by the way, economically, because you're not doing the, stroke interventions, you're not going to get that money, as well. But hey, it's really good for, for patient care, right? And so we had to find alternative ways. And that's where finding philanthropy and getting grant funding was really important. So the Rapid AK initiative basically is 3 years funded to get RapidAI to 6 additional sites in Alaska. And these sites were chosen strategically so that we could cover both population and geography, okay? Samuel Simmons, YKHC, Fairbanks, Central Peninsula, ANTC, and Bartlett, okay? South Peninsula Hospital, I'm really sorry. You were really, really close to making the cut. I've already apologized to Tiffany Park, but it sounds like there might be some good news for you guys still as it comes to Rapid. There's also another site in the Southeast, Peace Health Ketchikan, that actually has Rapid, but doesn't have it turned on. We're going to work with them to get it turned on so we could really cover the state. Nome was another site that, we thought really heavily about, so we like to, try to get it out. Long story short, the goal of this is that for the sites that were granted Rapid for 3 years, paid for via the grant from the Leacho Family Foundation, we ask that you participate basically in the Get With The Guidelines registry. As we talked about, one of the key components to a stroke system of care is having data to track. And unfortunately, our Department of Health, has not been funded to track stroke data in that inpatient setting for a very, very long period of time. Many, many hospitals are already, using the Get With The Guidelines database to track their own internal metrics to make sure that they're doing well when it comes to door-to-needle times, door-to-CT times, and everything else. And so now we just have to fit all this data together to create a shared database at the state level. And so thank you guys for participating and agreeing to that. The goal of this ultimately is actually not to transfer everybody to Anchorage. There's no way that we can accommodate for that. The goal of this is actually to identify the appropriate patients. So right time, right diagnosis, and right patients for intervention, right? And to reduce unnecessary stroke transfers. I think that, from a neurosurgeon's perspective, the largest cohort of patients that probably we could work on to not transfer if we don't have to is actually the intracerebral hemorrhage patients. And that has, is a little bit of a conflicting thing. Outside facilities are always where we don't have neurosurgery here. If something happens, what happens? And the reality is that they come here to Anchorage. We see them for 5 minutes and say, hi, we wrote a note, I saw you. And then that's it. Nothing else happens. So especially with the technology like the ICH identification, the auto volume module, we can now say, hey, let's as a state agree upon and build a protocol that says that if your total, hemorrhage volume is less than, let's say 20 cc's arbitrarily, you don't have these other features, you're not on blood thinners otherwise, that we will agree that as a state that you can safely stay at your institution, for ICU, neuro checks and whatnot. If there is an issue, when you get the repeat scan, again, because it's AI and it's automated, we can really compare, apples to apples. All right. So if you think about what happened in stroke care over the course of time, these are sort of the phases that occur. We have, thrombolytics available, telestroke, telemedicine services take over so that, our outpatient community providers for neurology don't have to always rush from their clinic into the hospital to evaluate a patient, make a decision about T&K and things like that. Stroke thrombectomy comes into play. RapidAI is initially applied to the thrombectomy capable centers. And then we are now in phase 3, basically. So implementation of RapidAI across Alaska, so that we can create a stroke imaging infrastructure for decision making. And along with that, create a statewide stroke registry so that we can begin to track what's happening, look at how well we're doing. Maybe some stuff we're doing better than we think, or maybe there's some stuff that we are not doing very well in. But without data, we'll never know. And without this data, we'll never know how we can improve upon patient care for our population. What does the interface look like? As you can see, all the hospitals are listed except for Samuel Simmons. If someone is here from Samuel Simmons, could I please talk to you at the end of this so that we can get added, so that we can see your site's Rapid data? So you might ask, all right, great, you got Rapid. All of this kind of rolled out starting around fall time last year, and more or less by January, most of the sites were up and running. Are we actually using it? What does that look like? So basically, since January until July, these are over 5,000 scans were processed. How successful were they? The majority of them were very successful. 150, so a very, very small percentage, of them, had errors or issues. The bottom chart graph over here, I want to really point out, which is the patient count by month. Most of the hospitals are, fairly low. And what that means is that, the techs are only sending the images if the provider has ordered it as a stroke protocol CT head or CT angiogram, or that they know this is a stroke alert and they select the Rapid protocol to do that. I want to point out, I want to highlight what Fairbanks has done and what we're hoping to get all of you guys to do as well, which is they said, listen, any patient getting a CT head or a CT angiogram of the head and neck, it should automatically send to Rapid. This is super important because if it turns out that the patient that you were working up for stroke didn't really think had a stroke, but then now has a stroke, if it didn't get sent to Rapid, if it didn't get selected as the Rapid protocol, we won't see it on our phone app. We won't be able to see it. And then we have to call back to your text to ask them, hey, can you push the images again? And while we can technically do that, it takes time because this automated process that we were hoping for has now become a manual process. The ultimate goal at the end of the day of applying Rapid from an imaging standpoint for your facilities is not to create more work, it's to create less work. If right now your techs have to make the decision or your providers have to 100% always indicate that this is a stroke image, it means that they have to actively think about it and do this. And if they don't, then that patient falls off or that imaging falls off. A much simpler and easier way is to ask you guys to basically allow all of the CT heads, all of the CT angiograms of the head and or the neck to automatically send to Rapid no matter what the indication. Now, all of a sudden, if someone forgets to do it, if they click the wrong protocol, it doesn't matter. This patient is still going to get caught. I will tell you also that the other added benefit of having all of your images push over is that if there are quality issues, if the perfusion doesn't look good, if the CTA is wonky, if the 3D reconstructions are bad, we can see that in a short number of scans. More importantly, then when we reach back out to that facility with Rapid, technical support and say, hey, can we look into what's going on? They're able to really quickly triage what the problems are, fix it, and then right away we see the improvement. If you're only sending 5 scans every 2 months, we're never going to see improvement, and you're also never going to see what the utility of this is. More importantly, because this is being pushed to a server and the images get scrubbed after, anywhere from 40 to 72 hours, you're not going to overload the system. You're not going to, take up too much memory. Okay. So my thing for this next phase is that I really want the sites to think about just auto sending all of this stuff because there's really not a harm to it. Okay. And this is essentially how Rapid works, basically, which is that at the end of the day, you get your imaging, everything is acquired. There's a hospital firewall, and then the images, the reason why it can send quickly is that instead of sending all 1,400 slices, it actually just sends one of the acquisitions in a compressed file format directly from the CT scanner to the Rapid server, as opposed to going to the PAC system where it gets downloaded and then going from there out through your firewall up and over. And so this is what allows for the speed of it. When we look at what is the utilization of CT perfusion and things like that, realistically, it probably should be pretty close to, almost a 1-to-1. If you have patients that are having, stroke or significant stroke-like symptoms, again, we love perfusion as interventionalists. It is inherently helpful. If you've got a patient with a large M1 stroke, of course, get the CT perfusion. What we're looking for in that situation is the patient going to be a candidate for stroke intervention? You might have another patient that has, maybe complete loss of language function, but their arms are moving. Definitely sounds like a stroke. And you get the CTA and it says, yeah, everything looks normal, but you're like, yeah, but this patient is not talking. Getting the CT perfusion is helpful because we are now going after what's called medium vessel occlusion. So M2 branches, smaller branches that go to purely eloquent locations in the brain, speech, motor function, vision, things like that. And it's very easy to miss these smaller branch occlusions because the first part of the artery that our eyes are naturally drawn for looks like it's filling. It's these small bifurcating branches. When you get CT perfusion with us, you can see where the deficits are. You see where the penumbra is. And if you talk to the radiologists that read a lot of perfusion, they'll say a lot of times we're reading the perfusion first. We see that, change in the penumbra, and then we go back and see, okay, where did we miss it? Where is the medium vessel occlusion? This is insanely, helpful because even though a patient with a medium vessel occlusion is probably not going to, need a hemicraniectomy or things like that, but if they can't speak and that never recovers, that's a big problem still too. So we had previously sort of put this out and said, in the patients who are outside of the thrombolytic windows, definitely consider getting a CTP. In the patients who are within, consider it for high stroke and whatnot. I'm just going to tell you the truth. Please just get the CT perfusion on everybody, okay? More importantly, if you have a CT scanner that can do a CT angiogram, you can do a CT perfusion, okay? It may not be the prettiest, it may take more contrast, but you can do it. Kevin came from a facility that was, I think, a 16-slice CT scanner. I don't know if he's here somewhere. And they did CT perfusions all the time, okay? And the key with this is this, basically. A lot of times from the transferring facilities, what's unspoken from the ER provider, when I say, well, everything looks okay, I don't think this patient's a candidate, they've already had stroke, is this concern that, well, what if they had this advanced imaging that you guys do down in Anchorage, and what if we got that for them and it turns out they might be a candidate, and it's just that we're missing this because we don't have it. Now that we're applying Rapid across all these different sites in Alaska, we can definitively say, listen, I'm looking at your perfusion data, I'm looking at your CT A data, I'm looking at your CT head, and if this patient were here in our ER in front of us right now, they would still not be a candidate. That's a load of relief, I think, for the ER providers, for the transferring facilities, and also to take that information back to the families and say, listen, I have spoken to, our specialists here in Anchorage. We're all using the same, high-tech software and, AI imaging. And unfortunately, this is not going to be, a good event for them. And we can avoid unnecessary transfers. We've had several patients, coming from Kenai Peninsula where this has been the case, where because they got the CT perfusion and we can see it, I'm looking at it, we're talking to the ER providers and telling them, listen, this patient does not qualify. They're not going to get an intervention. And they didn't have to, transfer necessarily. When you look at the prior data sort of internally about the percentage of patients that were transferred for either LVO or suspected LVO and the number of actual interventions that we did, it's not a very high hit rate. It's just under 50%. This is concerning because it means that at least a portion of these patients probably didn't have to be transferred. We admit there's probably a portion that between when they transferred and when they arrived no longer became candidates, but there's also probably a significant portion that were never candidates to begin with, right? So if we can identify those patients up front and avoid unnecessary transfers, that's a huge thing. It's basically a time thing, it's a safety thing, it's a financial thing. So common complaints, I've heard all of them. So this doesn't affect my current workflow. What is the point of using this exactly? Commonly heard from ER providers, radiologists sometimes. My facility can't do a CT perfusion. We don't have the shuttling software. We don't have perfusion software. Okay, this AI is wrong all the time. Like, what is the point of using it? What exactly is this? Do I have to use it? Why are we doing this? Why isn't the CT or the CTA in Rapid? Can I manually push images to Rapid? And why does Dr. X need to be allowed to see my site's Rapid images? Okay. So to address this, basically, AI and stroke, this technology and engagement with it is the key to improving the accuracy of it. It's the same idea, right? Like if you buy a Ferrari, but you never drive it, you'll never experience the exhilaration of driving, a custom-made, vehicle, right? So that's the whole thing, right? You have Rapid. If you're not going to engage with the technology, if you're not going to send your images to Rapid, if you're not going to then, come back and say, hey, what are the quality control issues? It seems like we're getting a lot of missed flags or, false positives. What's the issue here? If we never adjust any of these things, we'll never actually optimize it, right? Other analogies, like you get a new laptop, I'm a Mac user. So like every time I have a Mac, I get all the hotkeys and the little, hand gestures and everything, optimized. I love it. It's great. I get a new one. I'm impressed by the speed, but now I have to spend it feels like 3 months getting everything set up again so that it's the way that I want it. This is the same thing here, okay? Auto-send your imaging protocols from the CT scanner to the rapid scanner, so there are no missed patients when it comes to potential strokes or reviewing the imaging. We can real-time review bolus issues, timing issues. Rapid has been incredibly responsive. They probably get no less than 10 emails from me a week about, hey, like, what's going on with site X about their bolus issues? Their CT perfusion sucked the last couple of days. Like, what's going on with that? And they then reach out to your facilities and they'll work with you to fix whatever the issue is, okay? Reduce manual labor. At the end of the day, the key to automation into protocols is that we're trying to reduce the need for a human being to actively make a decision or to actively push a button, right? We want to standardize this. We want to automate this, right? Our effort and time is much better spent on things like trying to call EMS and tell them to come to our facility, calling the transfer center and dealing with them. It's not in making sure that we definitely wrote down stroke protocol CTA, that we definitely called overhead back to the CT tech, hey, it's a stroke protocol, make sure you run the stroke protocol, right? Or a new tech that's onboarding is like, what's a stroke protocol? Like, we'll just click this one, okay? So that's the whole point. At any rate, current protocols for PACS transfer radiology workflow are not meant to be affected by RapidAI. What Rapid is doing, what we're trying to do with this is to run in parallel. We still need you guys to push your images over to whatever receiving facility there is so that we have a record of that, in the same way that the receiving facility needs to then push all of their images back to you guys so that when the patient gets their follow-up in your community, your radiologists know what to look at and whatnot. The radiologist is, reimbursement, their dictation, their interpretation, none of that is meant to be affected. We're not here to replace the radiologist. They are still very, very important. The number of times that a radiologist, upon their final read, finds that there may be multiple vessels that are affected is higher than you would think. And we need them, for that. This is their job. They're looking at all of that. Manual pushing of imaging is possible after the fact. It doesn't work very well. It takes a long time. Don't rely on this as our method of being able to see the stroke imaging. And then at the end of the day, each individual hospital and site gets to control who has access to the server. More importantly, allowing Dr. Sokolowski and I to be able to see your server's imaging does not allow us access to your EMR, does not allow us access to your PAC system. More importantly, the images from the Rapid server automatically delete themselves after anywhere from 2 to 4 days, depending on how you have your settings set, okay? So Rapid is meant to facilitate and parallel process several imaging dependent decision points to shorten the identification and transfer of appropriate patients to a higher level of care. Okay, this is the key. We're trying to do this for the appropriate patients, the patients that need a transfer and the patients that don't need to should stay in your local communities. Okay, we want to improve upon the speed of transfers, decrease the time to intervention, avoid unnecessary transfers. Right now, phase one was to get Rapid up and going, to get it, piloted, to start working with it. I think some of your providers have probably had interactions with us where, they're like, who is calling us about a stroke? How do they even know about the stroke? Like, what is this big brother situation, right? And it's because it's coming across in Rapid. Either the AI is triggering or we see that the CT perfusion has a large penumbra. What we want to ask your sites now is, instead of waiting the traditional wait time of they get the imaging, they come back, we wait for radiology to read the images, we have someone from our facility push the images to Providence or Alaska Regional, and then we wait, and then we call to talk to them. We want to ask your providers is that you already know if the patient has a high stroke deficit, they have a high stroke scale. If it's greater than 5 and they've come back from imaging, engage early, reach out now, okay? The only way that we're gonna shorten the time frame basically from when the patient gets imaging until we can make a decision for transfer is by doing this part. This is where the manual process or the active effort should be placed on, right? Modified rankings of 3. 2 years ago, when the large core infarct trials came out, looking at essentially patients that we had previously excluded from stroke intervention, they had a sizable infarct already, maybe 1/3 of the MCA territory. It was very controversial, and what I mean by that is people who were in urban centers versus people who came from rural places had very differing reactions to this for various reasons. Especially in Alaska, a modified ranking of 3 means that somebody can go home to their village. They can live with their family. They may not be fully independent. They're not going to drive, but they are independent enough to be able to do that. And that's huge for Alaskans, right? And this also means though that, patients that come to us maybe because of delayed transfer, when we look at it, we can still at least offer them potential for recovery. Does it look the same? Absolutely not. Am I still a little bit, cautious about which patients we offer this to? Absolutely. Okay. But it does seem to be of a benefit, but we're talking about a much longer timeline for recovery and whatnot. We talked about the statewide stroke coalition situation and the statewide data. And so these are some of the generations and maps that we've gotten. This looks at basically the breakdown of, strokes by arrival mode. So about half of the patients arrived at your facility by EMS. The other, 30% are maybe transfers from somewhere else. And then roughly 20% of patients getting transferred to outside facilities, okay? patients with door in, door out times less than 90 minutes. Overall, so the red is the Alaska hospitals. The blue is, I believe, the the Pacific. So that's all of the West Coast plus Hawaii and Alaska. And then the green is just the West Coast. Okay. So overall, yes, we are definitely lower than everybody else, but sequentially, we're actually making some progress over the course of the last 3 years. Okay. So these numbers go from 5% to 13, to 16. This issue about door in, door out or DIDO times is that I think that we're probably measuring the wrong things. We have a lot of things outside of our control and even outside of medevac's control when it comes to door in, door out. Is the flight available? Is the flight crew available? Have they approved the flight plan? They have up to 45 minutes to do that. Then they have to then they have to muster and get to the airport to then get on the plane to then fly to the airport closest to your hospital to then get on an ambulance to then go to your hospital to then pick up your patient, drive back to the airport, get back on the airplane, fly back to Anchorage, and then pick up another, ambulance and then go to the hospital, right? When you start adding all these times up, there's probably times that we can't change in all of this, right? I think that the correct thing to measure instead of door in, door out times directly is door to decision times for transfer, right? And I think that if we start looking at that, then we're going to see a significant improvement in change compared to before. More importantly, if we then look at the door in, door out times, minus the door to decision times, we now have a much better measure of exactly how long is the quote wait for transfer services. I think that, anytime we have a prolonged transfer and we go back and we say like, this took forever, it's always like, well, this was the issue and this was the issue. And then Bob wasn't wearing green shoes and whatnot. And I'm putting you guys on blast. That's not what I mean. But maybe we can look at it and say, there's actually, some other things going on. Maybe there are better ways that we can optimize how medevac services are either utilized or, if one service company says, hey, we can be there, but now it's been an hour or two and we're not, what else can we do? So this, I believe, is the map that indicates where the med flight crews are, essentially. They're strategically not always scheduled or centered in Anchorage. They're centered, everywhere else. One of the next phases is to also discuss with, both our EMS providers and also medevac services, what are we going to do to optimize stroke transfer care? What do we do about patients who are recognized in the field as potentially having large vessel occlusions who are, within the thrombolytic window, outside of the thrombolytic window and whatnot? And this is probably where the next phase of how we can optimize and improve upon stroke care is. How are the hospitals that are receiving patients doing? What are our, door to device times within 60 minutes for transferring patients or 90 minutes for, direct arrivals are? Not surprisingly, prior to 2022, they were pretty low. As you can see, just in the course of the last year, we've made some significant improvements. Again, the red is the Alaska sites. The blue is the Pacific sites, so Alaska, Hawaii, plus the West Coast, and the green is the West Coast. We've made significant strides, and a lot of that is also dependent upon the fact that we now, have a clear system in place. When we know the patient is transferring, we are going to push the pedal. We're going to push this issue until the patient gets through their imaging and they get to the cath lab. And the cath lab staff really have to be given a lot of credit for this. This is an incredibly disruptive thing to wake them up an hour before the patient gets here, tell them to come to the hospital, get set up, and there's still the possibility that this patient may not qualify for intervention afterwards, right? Once they get there, because things changed or they got better. That happens a lot too. The fact that, our cath lab staff are more than willing to do this because it's the right thing for the patient, really have to give them a lot of credit for that, because they do that for stroke, they do it for STEMI, for IR, for vascular surgery, the list goes on. So let's talk about, this was a case actually that happened very recently, just a couple of days ago. So comes in, auto LVO detect. We can see there's a large penumbra. I was awake answering another phone call at the time, saw this come up, and I called the ER directly to talk to the ER physician. Was met with a little bit of skepticism. They thought I was the radiologist, had to re-explain, no, I'm the interventionalist, your patient. And he goes, how do you know about the stroke patient exactly? It's like, teleneurology's talking to him right now. I was like, it came across in Rapid. He goes, what's Rapid? So I implore you, those who are here representing your sites, we should probably do a little bit more education for your providers too, to understand, because they can also have access to this. At Alaska Regional, a number of our younger ER providers like having access to Rapid. When there's a large perfusion, it dings on their, on their watch or on their phone. They look and they say, oh, this looks great. They get excited about it. So these are important things. This patient was coming in from Fairbanks, and so has a large, perfusion deficit and had what we call a tandem occlusion, meaning that the internal carotid in the neck is completely occluded. We had to open that up along with suck the clot out from the brain. Okay. This is a great clot picture of this. Mm-hmm. And so as Dr. Alberts had previously explained, when you look at the perfusion imaging, you basically get a row of images that may have purple in them. And purple means that it's completely dead already. It's unlikely to be recovered. And then you have the green pictures. What you're hoping for is that with successful recanalization or the removal of the blood clot and reestablishment of normal blood flow, if the perfusion is accurate and you get good recanalization, then your final MRI at 24 hours that stroke volume should look like the purple and not the green. As you can see here, that's exactly what happened for this patient. One of the things about perfusion when it first came out was that everyone said, well, how can you predict if it's true or not? And that's what they did. We basically looked at the follow-up MRI 24 hours. If you got a good result, does it look like what it was predicted to be? The last bit, and I'll get off the stage and get out of your hair, is as a state, we have an unfunded mandate, and we're not recognizing that stroke, STEMI, and trauma really need to be recognized legislatively so that we can get funding to the Department of Health so that we can start tracking this. And so, as you can see, Alaska is one of the few states in the U.S. that doesn't have any, legislation. Genevieve Mina, representative for the Airport Heights District, is here, and she has sponsored a bill, HB 191, that has made it all the way through committee and hopefully will be voted upon, here in this in the next session, maybe. Yeah, fingers crossed. And so she's done the bulk of the work. Basically, we met socially through mutual friends. And then I said, hey, I have this great idea. And she sat down with me for like 3 hours after I'd done a really long AVM resection. I just poured my heart out about all of this. And she took abundant notes and basically said, all right, we'll get this done. And so here we are. For the initial committee hearings, we had a number of patients, both older and younger patients, along with EMS and providers, testify about the importance of stroke recognition, the impact that stroke has on both their lives, and also the impact that successful stroke treatment has on their day-to-day function in the long term. Anyway, so timely diagnosis matters. Time is brain, right patient, right diagnosis, right time to intervention, all matters. Current technology and data transfer is already at maximum capacity. We have to look at alternative ways to do this. That's where Rapid comes in. Rapid is not meant to replace your radiologist. It's not meant to replace our current protocols for getting images transferred from one facility to another. It's meant to work in the background, and it's meant to work together with your clinicians so that we can identify patients easier, sooner, faster, and make better decisions to shorten that timeline. And so more importantly, this is the last slide. So I promise I'll get off the stage here. So everyone always wants to know, okay, fine, you guys have been collecting data. What does that data look like? This is basically the data, okay? The year-to-date 2024 data is missing one of the 6 hospitals. And so the absolute numbers are not entirely correct, but the thrombectomy numbers I want to point out are. Last year, we did just under 90 thrombectomies. As of July, we've already reached that target, and we're well past it from what I can tell. This isn't that magically people are having more LVOs. These patients have always existed, but we've had an issue with being able to either identify them or standardize which ones we're going to treat or ensure that they transferred in a timely enough manner so that we could still treat them when they arrived, okay? And so realistically, we should be doing probably close to 100, 125 stroke interventions a year for a population of this size, okay? And then please join the Alaska Stroke Coalition. Our meetings are bi-monthly, unfortunately, at 6 a.m. Thanks.
So I think in addition to being a powerhouse, we can now bestow the title of lecturer extraordinaire. Thank you, Dr. He. Are there questions from the audience? I have a million running through my head, but I want to make sure that we're also giving you the opportunity to ask some questions. Please go ahead.
So I was a tech at a hospital and the stroke in this like 2011, and I saw a video of a patient who came in completely paralyzed on one side, and they did a thrombectomy, and the next day she was feeding herself with that arm. And that sold me on stroke care from that point on. And I know in my struggles at the hospital that I worked at, we haven't gotten a lot of buy-in. So my question is, what are we doing to educate the chain, right? Everybody at the hospital, from EMS to medevac to all that, so that we're all on the same page and all kind of have the same desire to make it happen as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
No, absolutely. And I think it's a twofold thing. It's, if we just go there and tell your providers what to do, that doesn't go over usually very well. At the same time, the fact that, each of you is here from different hospitals representing because you care, because you believe that this works is important. So I think it's a combined approach of, the patients that come in that get stroke intervention, making sure that we give you guys the follow-up. Hey, here's what it looks like. Here's how they're doing. And then also the delayed follow-up. Here, 6 months later, 3 months later, we've seen the patients. I think also part of it too is to we have to shift the frame of mind mind, basically. Instead of waiting for this normal sequence, waiting for radiology to read it, we really have to push. And maybe some of that comes not from the physicians potentially, but maybe from the nurse, right? Hey, telestroke said this patient's got a stroke scale of greater than 6 already. They're back from their imaging. We know that we're a rapid center. We know that we've within radiology changed the protocol, so everything's getting sent to rapid. Hey, should we call and ask somebody to look at these images? And so I think it takes that. I think also some of it too is that the data probably is important. If we can show that time to decision making is cut down, and that we already know from multiple other studies that time is brain, basically. But I'm also open to suggestions. If it's a format like this, if it's getting a series of cases from your facility and giving a presentation about what we did, what happened, our decision-making points, and what the follow-up looks like, I think that all of those things are reasonable things to do. So. Katie?
Knowing very little about how AI works, is Rapid a model that learns from itself over time? So like its own data improves its own software?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So the answer is yes, but maybe not in the way you think. Some people think every case is getting fed into some master database and it's going to get smarter because it's AI. What we do is we want to know when it's not working well. So we look at cases that are false positives or false negatives, and then we try to figure out why did that happen? Was it movement? Was it a particular type of artifact? And then we retrain the system. And then when you have a new algorithm, you have to go back through the FDA. So we have a new version of Aspects, which is much more accurate, that has just come out. It's called Aspects 3. That's by finding errors. And sometimes the problem is the protocol. Some sites are doing slabs that are too thick, and that confuses the software. But for the proper protocol, if it's making a mistake, we want to know why, retrain and get it cleared. One of the biggest improvements that will come out next year is the new LVO module. As people mentioned now, there's some false positives on the LVOs. So we've been able to figure out why those are and reprogram to have a much more accurate LVO module that also goes to the basilar, which is a very important vessel, and is now going to those distal vessels as well.
Hi, Mike Levy, EMS. Caroline, thanks a lot for AI bringing this to us. It's fantastic. Dr. Alpers, this was really great to hear your talk. And Lucy, it was fantastic. So thank you so much for everything. This is to you, Dr. He. So as I heard you talk, the idea of triaging people back to a facility to have imaging done and then apply RapidAI and make decisions from that. So in South Central specifically, where we have rotor wing, and we have people that might be equidistant from a hospital that doesn't provide an intervention, as opposed to taking them someplace that does. Did I understand you to say that perhaps it's better to take all these people to a primary stroke center that has CT, even if it might be equidistant, to go to a comprehensive stroke center?
No, not necessarily. I think that it's kind of a multifold question. The question that you're really asking is, what is the flight of time to get a patient from where they are to the next available facilities? Obviously, if it's closer to get them to a primary stroke center and they're within a thrombolytics window, then they should go to get thrombolytics. But if it's equidistant, my professional opinion is that, especially if we have reliable pre-hospital, LVO screening, that it would make more sense for the patient to go to a larger center where they can get direct care. One of the problems with the transfer care model is that it's not like a sum of the transfer times from point A to point B and then point B to point C. It's usually an exponential increase in time. There's been multiple studies, especially in California, that document this, where like if the patient rolls from one hospital to the next, it takes them like 12 or 14 hours to get to their final destination, right? And so if we're really going to be clear about what we're doing, part of it also is that, and it was just in the slide about the system of stroke care, which is that pre-hospital screening. So whether that's VAN plus, whether that's CSTAT, whether that's LAPS or LAMS, I think that there's a lot of pre-hospital screening exams that we can do to try and identify LVOs. When you talk to the physicians that cover telestroke in Oregon, Washington State, Texas, and whatnot, everybody uses a slightly different system. Everybody agrees that you have to train your EMS providers to do it. You have to retrain them to ensure that it's accurate. And more importantly, once someone is identified in the field as potentially having an LVO, we then need to track the data. Did this patient actually have an LVO? Did they actually get an intervention? And then figure out, in the same way that Dr. Albers was talking about, it's good to feel like we're right, but also also the ones that are false positives, what happened, and how do we refine that technique? And until we start collecting that data and start doing that as a protocol, we won't know. Interestingly, enough, when you talk to the telestroke providers that cover, Oregon, Texas, along with Alaska, they'll tell you basically every state, every region uses something different. And so, it's not necessarily that Fairbanks and, AFD, in the borough have to agree on the same thing. It's more just that we're implementing this, that we're looking at the accuracy, and then more importantly, just like with the stroke intervention follow-ups, we're getting a follow-up about, was this a real LVO? Yes, no. One of the other things too that is difficult is that one of the things that we have to identify is that if a patient is seen, like how long is it going to take, right? So if your provider is in the field and, and we still have to call in rotor wing, we need to have I guess a better way of describing is a much more accurate assessment of what is the actual travel time. Obviously with rotor wing, it's much faster than it is, with fixed wing. But I think that's one of the issues too, is that time is very variable. And if you, really look at it with weather outside of the equation, I think it's much more standardized than we think. The problem is just that we haven't been tracking it appropriately.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. He and Dr. Albers again. And thank you for the question.